All right, how was lunch? Just lunch and the t-shirt's worth the ticket price alone. But wait, there's more. There's Jordan Quintal. Jordan's a 15-year new media veteran. I met Jordan years ago. For those who don't know, he's been a speaker at a dozen WordCamps all across North America. He runs his own company, Genius Media, and they've been in business for over 3 years now, and they specialize in web, website, and WordPress development. Of course, this talk is on accessibility, and it's a big deal for me too. I'm really excited Dwayne's here too. Our product, WP Touch, has been translated into dozens of languages, but we're not fully accessible yet, and it's kind of painful for us. So we're excited to be here and to be here for Jordan's talk, and we know we want to make our product accessible. And it really is the way that we should all be developing with WordPress, and we should all be thinking about accessibility. So, but he knows more than I do, so I'll let him go ahead. Give a warm welcome to Jordan.
Thanks, Dale. As mentioned, yeah, I'm a pretty long-time veteran of WordPress. I started with WordPress back in 06, so we're using it for a long time. We've seen it evolve from a very basic blogging system to the powerful CMS it is today. Over the last 2 years, I've presented at over a dozen WordCamps. Majority of them are on accessibility. Now, I'm not an accessibility expert. I've only been involved for the last 2 years, learning more, trying to make our media more accessible. But a lot of what I do is advocate. So I can't teach you how to make something accessible in 45 minutes. That's impossible. It could literally take days and days to get people up to par. But what I am going to do is I'm going to give you the fundamentals of it. I'm going to expose to you the different terms, and the different compliancy levels, and the different tools that you can use so that you can actually make your media a lot more accessible. So a lot of what I'm going to do is the fundamentals. By fundamentals, I just mean I'm going to give you an overview of all the bits and pieces that make up web accessibility. And more specifically, towards the end, is going to be all related to WordPress and the different tools and the different things you can do to make your WordPress websites, themes, or plugins more accessible. So in terms of WordPress accessibility, it's not exclusive to just the front-end websites. Those that build plugins, those that build themes can also utilize this stuff as well. So it's not just for websites, it's for everything. Front-end, back-end, the whole gambit. So let's jump into it. Now, show of hands, who here is a developer? More towards the development end. Great, a lot of you. Now, when I say web accessibility, how many of you are unsure what exactly I mean? Don't be shy. Come on, it's okay. Great. So a few people unsure. It's pretty common. This is not something that is mainstream. It's not something that is streamlined yet. Not everyone's doing it, but it's important. I'm going to tell you why it's important. Now, accessibility doesn't just cater to those with disabilities. Think about those that are aging. Right? Accessibility is more common, from the age group 65 and up. And that could just be a result of old age. Those that get injured, you get hit by a car, you limited use of your arm now. That's accessibility comes into play for those people. So it's not just for people like me, it's for everybody. The future you, that's kind of what we say. Or the future, in 20 years when this becomes mainstream, you're all going to be thankful that you can use websites in your, not all of you are going to be old in 20 years, but you get the point. You get the point. So let's dive right into it. What is web accessibility? All right. So we'll discuss the literal definition. We'll discuss some common misconceptions, and then we're going to dig into benefits as well as kind of what it means to me. Give you a little personal story. So according to the W3C Web Accessibility Initiative, and that's the World Wide Web Consortium, right? So this is the organization that kind of governs the internet in terms of standards, guidelines, et cetera, et cetera. The Web Accessibility Initiative, WAI for short, W3C-WAI is the short form for it. And that particular group of people that are part of the W3C organization have come up with guidelines and standards for what they consider to be web accessible. So literal meaning is web accessibility means that people with disabilities can use the web. Very, very straightforward. More specifically, web accessibility means that people with disabilities can perceive, understand, navigate, and interact with the web, right? So you're able to interact, understand, navigate. Those four things, perceive, understand, navigate, and interact, those are kind of like the four, I would say, major components of anything that's web related, right? You need to be able to understand what you're seeing, perceive it, interact, and navigate. And also that they can contribute, right? So we're not only talking about making websites themselves more accessible, but we're also talking about making the tools used to build websites more accessible, right? Things like WordPress. It's a publishing tool. It should be, if it's going to be the most popular CMS out there, it probably should be the most accessible. So those that have different challenges can log on and build their own blogs, build their own websites, no matter what limitations or challenges they have. Right? So that's right off the website that you can go to. Pretty straightforward. Makes sense. Everyone, I think, has a good idea of what I'm talking about now when they see this definition. Common misconceptions. When I say web accessibility, some of you see this guy. Any Walking Dead fans? Sure. Web accessibility is hard. It's time consuming. It's costly. It's ugly. It's scary. Ooh, I don't want to go there. I don't know anything about it. I want to stay away. It's that guy right there. Not very pretty. But
Good teeth.
Pardon me?
Good teeth.
Yeah, definitely. But those misconceptions are generally not true. It's not difficult. I mean, the programming involved is pretty straightforward. Intermediate developer can understand how to program for web accessibility. If they have the proper audit or analysis or strategy based around web accessibility, any intermediate to advanced developer can tackle this kind of stuff. So it's definitely not learning anything new. It's based on everything you know. It's just how you apply it, how you put it together. Time consuming? No. If you bake web accessibility into your development process right off the bat, and that's one of your focal points, even before you start developing, you're not going to find that it takes any more time than how you would normally program. Right? Costly? Again, that comes into play with time. If you can properly work in web accessibility to your regular development processes, then you'll find that time and cost really don't come into play at all. Ugly, people think, oh, they're accessible, which means they can't be pretty or good looking. And perhaps in the past that may have been true because of the just the way the web worked. But nowadays, people they wouldn't even know that a site was built for accessibility just by looking at it because they're pretty seamless now. There's a lot of designs and a lot of templates that look great and also function well. So web accessibility is not this guy. It's not scary. A dagger to the head will take care of that. Some of the benefits, right? Some of the other things that web accessibility can do for you. Overall improvement of usability for all your users, right? So not just the ones that have challenges, but every single user will find that the usability of your site is much easier and way more fluent. And this is what's called the curb cut effect. Now, for those of you that don't know what a curb cut is, it's pretty straightforward. If you think about sidewalks at the corners, they dip down to the level of the street to make it flush. That was originally implemented for people in wheelchairs. I can't think of one person to this day that doesn't appreciate those curb cuts. Someone with a stroller, someone with a carriage, someone with luggage, et cetera, et cetera. It's just become an extremely useful tool for everyone and anyone. So the curb cut effect is basically that. The original idea was build something accessible. In turn, it actually benefited everybody. So that you'll find that web accessibility works exactly the same. Users that require the accessibility end of it will have an easy time using it, and those that don't will have an even easier time, right? So it also improves SEO. I tell this to a lot of people, and they don't quite understand it, but if you think about it, think of Google as a blind tester, right? Google can't actually see your site. It's not looking at the site itself. Google does not have eyes. But it must be able to interpret your site, which means depending on the way you program it and the way you tag it, it's going to be able to interpret exactly what's in that site, what to pull out of it, what's indexable, et cetera, et cetera. Accessibility is pretty much the same thing. You're using semantics and you're using tags to improve the overall accessibility of your site, which in turn is exactly what Google is looking for. A lot of people don't know that, but it makes sense, right? So if a person that can't necessarily see your site should still be able to interpret it. That's exactly what Google does. And obviously, a satisfaction of knowing that you've gone ahead and improved the internet experience for somebody that needs it. Satisfaction is a good thing. I like it. I'm sure a lot of you like it. So yeah, it's a good feeling. This thing is just jumping over. What it means to me. Things like the internet and WordPress power websites. They can also empower individuals. I actually wrote an article on this. It's on HeroPress.com. HeroPress is an interesting initiative where the gentleman that started it basically wanted to get stories from people that were impacted by WordPress and how it impacted their lives. And so I wrote something along these lines where as a tool, internet's just another tool. It's a tool for communicating, a tool for networking, a tool for keeping up to date, et cetera, commerce, starting businesses. And so for those that have challenges like myself, options were limited. You know, I wasn't going to be a firefighter, not going to be a professional baseball player. Right? Makes sense. But the internet was a realm that I could succeed in. It didn't have as many limitations or restrictions as the physical world did. The virtual world, in the virtual world, I was able to break down those limitations. I was able to start freelancing, building my own sites. I was able to build a company. Started myself, now we're a team of 5 in the span of the last 4 years. So I've done a lot. And it was really only because of the internet and because of WordPress. You know, WordPress was a tool that cut down programming time for me, right? So I didn't have to spend hours and hours and hours programming the site. I'd spend half the time, half the physical energy, and still produce quality work. And to me, that was huge, because you know, fatigue and you know, muscle aches and stuff like that from sitting in front of a computer was definitely an issue for me. And WordPress helped me streamline processes, helped me you know, quickly and efficiently put together websites without having to strain myself or you know, spend hours upon hours upon hours of doing work that could be done in 1 hour, for instance. So that's kind of what it means to me. That's where web accessibility has impacted me. And there are definitely a lot of other individuals that may feel the same way. Maybe their career opportunities or their life choices are limited to what they can do. And the internet is definitely a place where limitations can be broken. So keep that in mind. When you're thinking about web accessibility, you know, think about how it can empower individuals and how it can definitely impact and change people's lives. Okay, so we're going to get into some key web accessibility terms, right? Stuff that you need to know. Now, I'm not going to go in depth into everything, but if you know, these slides are going to be actually is already online. But nonetheless, these are the kind of terms that you're going to need to go home, you're going to need to do more research on, you're going to need to understand what they mean, understand how they work, understand how to apply them, to truly understand and to truly start implementing web accessibility. Right? There's a couple of key things. It's not everything. I'm not going to go through the entire glossary of web accessibility terms, but this is the stuff you need to get started. Everything else kind of follows suit. But these are what I would, what I determine is to be kind of the key ones, the most important ones. So W3C WAI, as I mentioned, the Web Accessibility Initiative of the World Wide Web Consortium. That's kind of where things start. If you want to understand what W3C considers web accessible or what their guidelines are, it's a great starting point. It's a big read. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of information. Some of the verbiage is on the technical side, but overall, it's got everything you need. WCAG 2.0. These are the specific guidelines relative to web accessibility. So W3C WAI, that team, put together the WCAG 2.0, which is Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.0. And obviously, there was a version 1.0 somewhere. 2.0 is the most recent and the most up-to-date version. We're constantly adding to it, revising it, editing it with new technologies and new things coming out. They're keeping it up to date. And so these are the guidelines that everyone kind of follows suit with. It's very specific. It breaks down the different elements of web accessibility, which I'll get into, and it tells you how those particular guidelines impact people, who they impact, what they're for, et cetera, et cetera. So very detailed. It's a pretty long read as well, I won't lie, it's intense, but it's very informative. It's the starting point of really, truly understanding kind of what web accessibility expectations are, what the guidelines are, and you kind of get a better idea of who it affects and kind of how it all works in general. So definitely, if you want to get started in understanding web accessibility, start here, WCAG 2.0. AODA. This is Accessibility for Ontarians with Disability Act. This is a legislation that was passed in 2005. And the legislation basically had, the goal was for Ontario to be the most accessible province in Canada. It was a 20-year process. They said by 2025 their goal is to be the most accessible province in Canada. Now the AODA is broken down into several sections, so like things like employment, building infrastructure, and then one of them is communications, right? Digital communications, physical communication materials, all need to be accessible and inclusive to all. So no matter what your limitations are, you should still have access to all the information that everyone else does. So on the communications end, it gets into details of what this particular legislation guidelines are for web accessibility. A lot of it is starting with government sector, so they're in the processes of updating all their sites to be more accessible. From what I've heard, I believe that the government of Canada is going to be implementing the Adobe CMS system. I don't know if anyone's heard of it. I haven't. I didn't see it. But apparently Adobe has this content management system out there, and the government of Canada is switching over to them very, very soon. And apparently they've got all the accessibility features in there. Again, I haven't used it, I haven't seen it, but I just thought it was kind of cool. So this basically goes everything. Again, this is just a legislative stuff. What government organizations, mandates, public sector, private sector, even I believe now that even companies that have over 50 employees are now obligated to have accessible communication materials, accessible websites, accessible documents, whatever the case may be. So it's definitely coming a long way. Progress is not as good as I'm sure they were hoping. They're about halfway through their time frame and maybe about 15 to 20% progress. Major issue is enforcement. They're not really enforcing it. Either a pat on the back for those that do it or a kick in the butt for those that don't. They're really not doing any of it, right? So there's no incentive for a company to go out of their way to do it. Nobody's knocking on their door, nobody's bothering them. It's only in an instance where somebody wants to, you know, if let's say, for whatever reason, I couldn't get on a site that I really needed, I guess I could file a suit against that company and say, hey, you know, your website wasn't accessible, you got 50 or more employees, yada, yada, yada. Probably not going to happen. So enforcement is really the downfall so far, which I'm sure they're hoping to change. Section 508, same thing in the States. We're not in the States, so I won't get too deep into it, but it's basically the same thing. They've got legislations in place. They're not as strict. They're a lot looser than what the AODA is all about, but it's there, and so I guess that's worth a mention. Web accessibility evaluation. You're going to hear a lot of this, or see a lot of this on the web. And essentially, it's just testing, analyzing, and reporting. You've got a site, you plug in the URL or the page URL. It's going to tell you what you did well, where your downfalls are, and what the big issues are. Whole gambit, right? Which you need to know. You need to know how many people that specific issue is going to impact. You need to know how certain those issues actually are, right? Because there's a lot of the only thing with web accessibility is that there's a lot of gray. So some people may say things are not accessible, other people may disagree. So the evaluation kind of just outlines the issues, and then it's kind of up to you to implement those and kind of fix them. Again, a lot of it's really straightforward. I've never really encountered an evaluation that I couldn't handle myself. I'm not like a super advanced. I mean, I haven't actually programmed in the last 2 years, so simply just because I do more business end and managing end. But you know, this stuff is really straightforward. I mean, the information that comes out of the evaluation is straightforward, I should say. Assistive technologies. A lot of people don't know what's out there, but there are a lot of devices that are being used outside of the normal keyboard and mouse setup. It's not the only devices people use to operate a computer. There's a lot of different things, a lot of different tools, a lot of cool stuff out there that people are using to interact with computers, with the web, right? That's what's considered assistive technology. So things like a screen reader for the blind. Essentially all it does is it's going to, in a little digital voice, it's going to read out everything that's on a web page. So those that can't see can hear. It's basically converting text into audio, right? And that's a form of assistive technology. There's a couple of other things, like these. These are alternatives to your standard mouse and keyboard interface. Anything from a trackball to a joystick to as simple as one button. Some people only have the motor capabilities of operating one button. So your website literally should be operable with one key or one button. At the very maximum level, if you can achieve the one button navigation for your site, then at least you cover everything up above. I've used some of these. This guy right here, it's kind of like a trackball mouse thing. That's what I used when I was young. Super helpful, made navigating and interacting with computers way easier. And so, this is kind of just a breakdown, or kind of just a glance at all the things that are out there. A lot of people don't know about these things. They don't know. They just assume everybody's using a keyboard and a mouse. No, the 15 to 20% of people that have minor or severe disabilities use things like this. They also use things like this, Braille keyboard. Phenomenal. People with visual impairments can type. It's an extension. They just plug it into their computer, and it, I guess, converts the keys into Braille. I'm not exactly sure how it works, but I thought it was awesome. Cool, great. That's definitely a step in the right direction. Then you get into things like this, sip and puff. That's a guy blowing into that device, and that device is interacting with a computer. This guy's not even using his hands. Sip and puff, which means it does one action for when you blow into it, and another action when you inhale. That's basically all this gentleman's doing. Blowing blowing in, sucking back, blowing in, and inhaling and exhaling into the device, and it's typing away. Awesome. You don't even need to use his hands. That could be for somebody with severe, severe case where they only have motion in their, from the neck up, maybe, in that situation. Awesome. Very little effort, but still being used to interact with computers. And then there's this, eye control. That's pretty cool. So there's a little camera that follows the movement of your eye. Based on where your eye is going, it's going to move the mouse on your screen. So you can go on different, it's got like a digital keyboard there, right? So based on where the eye movement goes, it's going to click those buttons, or it's going to type those keys, or whatever the case may be. Again, in those severe situations where you have very limited motor abilities, eye movement is all you need. Phenomenal. This crazy thing. I didn't even know about this. I just found it on the internet and I was blown away. This is a brain-computer interface. It's literally hooked up to the guy's brain. Doesn't have to move a muscle. I didn't know that was out there. I don't know how many people are using it. I don't know if it's mainstream, but I thought it was super cool. And it just kind of showed you how minimal to how far you can take assistive technology, to the point where they've got this guy up there from the head with all these wires and stuff. Again, I'm not too sure how it works specifically, but pretty cool, right? Okay, so moving on from that, web accessibility semantics. And when we talk about semantics, we're talking about the programming end. Okay, your HTML, your H1, H2 tags, link text, and something called ARIA, which is Accessible Rich Internet Applications. ARIA is essentially an extension of HTML. So all the accessibility features that standard HTML does not have is in ARIA. But it's basically like writing HTML. It's got extended tags. It's got roles, so you can say this is a button or this is a form. So when somebody's using assistive technology, those devices already know what things are just based on these tags and these roles and these landmarks. So basically, this, from a semantics point of view, a lot of it has to do with structure. So when you're using your H1, H2 tags, a lot of people think that that was implemented for style purposes. You can have cool big font on the H1, but the H1, the header tags were actually originally integrated as a structural tool. So you'll be able to sectionally split your site into different areas using various heading tags. It's also an indication for the user when they get to an H1 that you're in a different part of, or you're viewing different type of content. So it gives the user an indication that you're in a new section. It's not a continuation of the last section. This is something new. It starts off with an H1 tag. That kind of gives indication that this is something different. Right? So the semantic end is really just how you structure and how you tag your HTML. So that assistive technologies, that guy that was plugged into his brain, that device is just going to read all the web accessibility semantics and interpret them, and then properly interact from there. So from the development end, it's really just HTML and ARIA. I mean, there's JavaScript stuff too. That's a little bit more advanced. But you can definitely do a lot of cool things with JavaScript accessibility. But for the most part, you're dealing with HTML and ARIA. If you want to get more into the programming side of web accessibility, definitely look into ARIA. Accessible Rich Internet Applications. Take a look, see what it's all about, see what it has. Really super easy to implement, and it goes a long way. So visual web accessibility. Right? This is more of the design aspect. Right? Fonts. You don't want to have super tiny fonts or super hard to read scripty fonts. Like, maybe they look cool, and but they're not really accessible. Those that have difficulty, even if it's a minor visual impairment, they can still see, but not that well. May find small fonts difficult. I mean, older people especially, right? The eyesight is kind of a general accessibility issue for those that are coming along in the years. And you know, fonts and color contrast are huge. By color contrast, they mean like putting dark gray text on top of a black background. It's very hard to see. They're too close in contrast. Your ideal contrast is black over white, like my slides here, white over black. Well, you know, white background, black text, high contrast. There's no way that the black is getting lost in the white or vice versa. It's very clear, it's very clean, it's very readable. So for the visual end or for the design end, these are the kinds of things that come into play, for the most part. Fonts and colors. Just want to make sure that you're keeping things nice and clean for the most part. Content accessibility, right? It's things like images, adding alt tags to your images. A lot of people think that it's just for Google. No, the screen readers, right? For a person that can't see an image, cannot actually see an image, alt tags are used to describe those images to the people. So he lands on a site, there's an image on there, can't see what that image is, the screen reader is going to say, guy with a dog and a beard, whatever the guy's doing, you know, guy playing baseball, whatever, right? It's just going to, a simple description to tell the user, you know, you're painting a picture for somebody that can't see, right? What is this picture of, what is it doing, blah, 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 etc. And then video transcription, right? So adding captions to your videos for those that can't hear, pretty common. You know, there's PDF accessibility as well. So kind of along the same lines as semantics. It's really just structuring your PDFs so that different technologies can also interact and navigate with them. But basically, that's kind of on the same lines as your regular semantic accessibility. So I didn't include that, but. In terms of content, definitely, you know, that's a lot of what a website is, or the meat and potatoes of a website is content. Without content, a website's just a bunch of empty sections and divs and frames, not much to it. Website is content. So content accessibility is definitely very important. Making sure you're tagging everything, transcribing, whatever the case may be. That's kind of, you know, one of the key elements of ensuring your site is accessible. You know, with WordPress accessibility, for instance, a lot of people just assume that if they build the site accessible, that their job is done, which is not the case. If you add a blog post a year later, you got to make sure that that's accessible in terms of the content, the images, blah blah blah. Right? So it's not only just building it right off the bat accessible, but it's also maintaining that accessibility with new and fresh content. Web accessibility tools. So again, evaluation tools. User agents, and that's just a fancy word for browser. I didn't want to put browser, just thought I'd throw some smart words in there. But user agent essentially is just a browser. There are specialized browsers that are strictly for web accessibility. Outside of your Internet Explorer, Google Chrome realm, there are other browsers that can be downloaded to a computer that pretty much are dedicated towards accessibility. There's a company based out of Toronto, I believe it's called eSential. They've come up with a browser. It's pretty phenomenal, actually. Like, if you want a good idea of the different tools and the different things people can use for accessibility, download their browser. Just look at it, view a site off it. Yes?
That's me. I'm with them.
That's you?
Yeah. Well,
Awesome.
not me. I just joined them, but
oh, really?
They are amazing.
Phenomenal.
Yeah.
Sorry, your name again?
Paul.
Paul. Paul's the man. He knows eSential.
Essential accessibility.
If anyone wants the website, you can ask Paul,
Yeah.
but later.
Yeah.
And then, you know, so they've again, user agents or browsers, and then browser extensions, right? So Firefox, Chrome, they've come up with a lot of new extensions that kind of add these accessible features and whatnot. So there are definitely a lot of tools out there where you can take, you know, your standard software and kind of extend it to do accessible things. So now we're going to get into WordPress accessibility. Finally, right? Most specifically, core, community, themes, and plugins, which to me are kind of like the four major pillars of WordPress. So in terms of community, WordPress actually has an accessibility group, and their primary focus is to test all the upcoming versions of WordPress for accessibility. So right now WordPress is in version 4.2 point whatever. These guys are already working on 4.3. They're already testing it out, submitting patches that they don't actually get to work on for. These are volunteers. All they do is test. New version of WordPress is coming out. They send it off to those guys. They test it. They report back, and the core developers implement as much as they can. I mean, unfortunately, not everything gets resolved. These guys, they go and they test and they submit, patches and bug fixes, and sometimes, they're limited with what they can do. Right? I think overall, the goal is that WordPress should be working towards baking accessibility into their overall process, not retrofitting it afterwards, which is what they're doing now. Drupal, on the other hand, sorry, I said Drupal. They've actually gone the extra mile. They've actually implemented, they've actually got developers that do accessibility for their core platform. Right? So hopefully WordPress can kind of move along in that direction as well. Core accessibility, again, that's the same group. This particular URL kind of just takes you through what they test for. So you can actually see what they're doing on their end, all the different elements they're testing, all the different aspects, all the different compliances, et cetera, et cetera. They go, and anyone can volunteer to do testing. I did some last year, keyboard testing. It was a good experience. There's a lot to it though. WordPress is pretty big, so when you're doing testing, you got to dedicate a lot of time to it. But they do a lot of great work, and everything is published online. So you can check them out on that link. You'll kind of get all the information you need to know about that group. WordPress accessible themes. This is actually relatively new. I think the accessible ready tag, came out like 6 months ago or something. And so now developers are building themes that already have integrated accessibility semantics, not content. So the programming right off the bat is already accessible. You've already got all your ARIA, all your headings, and all your HTML properly set up for accessibility. Now, downloading, installing, and adding content to an accessible theme does not give you an accessible website. Again, you have to ensure that your content is accessible as well. This is only going to give you the semantic end, and it's for the most part design as well. But the content is up to you. So there's a lot of themes. Started out with 6, and now they're up to 50. It's becoming exceedingly popular. A lot of people are getting on board. If you develop a theme, you've got to go through the WordPress theme evaluation team, and they audit the themes for accessibility. So not anyone can get the accessible ready tag. You build your theme, you submit it to the team. If it passes, you get the tag. If it doesn't, they tell you what failed. You can fix it, resubmit. So they're being pretty tight about who actually gets the accessible ready tag. You can definitely find a lot more about it. That link there just takes you to all the ones that got that tag, right? Theme/tag/accessibility ready. Those are all the ones that are published right now. Again, it's growing faster than I had anticipated, which is really encouraging, really good to see. WordPress accessibility plugins. So there's a bunch of plugins that you can add to your site that will fix common accessibility issues, that will add accessibility tools, that will evaluate your WordPress website. Right? A whole bunch of things, from evaluation to semantics, to content accessibility, visual accessibility, everything and anything. This particular link is a couple of recommended tools that the accessibility group has published. There's a lot more than what's on that page specifically, but those are the ones that they found most useful. A couple of cool things. WP accessibility is a great tool. It's been around for a while. They've got like contact form and gravity forms accessibility extensions. What else? There's a Twitter feed, fully accessible Twitter and Facebook feeds. So pretty much across the board, got a lot of great tools. Any questions? Yes.
Excellent speech.
Thank you.
Do you consider language a accessibility feature? And
Yes.
For example, if you have a company of over 50 people and you're in Canada, do you have to write it in English and French?
I mean, in what language you have to write it in, that's a little bit different. What you do, though, with your HTML is you have to specify what language your site is in. So the very first thing you do when you're creating accessibility for your site, the very first tag that you're adding is language attribute. So when your user gets to your site, if they can't see it, first thing they're going to know is what language that's in. If it's in, obviously language has a lot to do with how things are written in red. Right? Like English is left to right, top to bottom, whereas Chinese is a lot different. So people need to know that before they get to the site. So language, what language you write it in is a little bit, is not as concerning as actually telling the person what language you're using. So if you've got, you know, if there's a translation, you're also going to be able to tell that person, like, this is translating from English to French, whatever the case may be. I know I don't have a lot of time, but if there are any other questions, I'll take one. I got 5 minutes, I'll take one or two, maybe three, depending on how they go. Sure, go ahead, sir.
A question and a notion. One was you said that black on white or white on black is the most legible. There are people, a lot of people, however, have contrast issues where an 80-20 or 25-75 is much, much preferable, but still visible for most other people.
Right, yeah, from what I know, the 80-20 is kind of the standard, which I guess is not like specifically white on black, but I mean, I'm not really a designer, so pardon my color ignorance.
Can I give you a notion that occurred when you were showing the assistive technology, the one-button navigation? It occurred to me that actually the most navigable interface that we have now is a mobile one. Even if you think of the finger as a single button. And so it occurred to me that if one was able to show a mobile site full screen, at like 1280 pixels, then it would become a much more navigable site for those who have food-assisted devices.
Yeah,
Anything like that?
I mean, mobile accessibility is kind of a different realm. I mean, yes and no. I kind of see where you're going, but like mobile has a lot more, like you can swipe up and down, left and right. It's got more, there's more interactivity than just pushing a button. Where literally like that one device is just press, press, press. That's all you can do. That's how you're operating. Whereas mobile's got a lot more.
Okay.
You can tilt and swipe and all kinds of other cool things. Yeah, pinch, zoom, there you go. Thank you, Jeff. All kinds of different things that you would need use of your digits to be able to do that kind of stuff. Whereas pushing a button, you do like this, right? That's me pushing a button with my elbow. I wouldn't be able to navigate a phone with my elbow, probably not. But I could push a button, push that one button that I showed you before. Do it with my elbow, probably do it with my nose if I had to. If that was the only way I could do it, great. Could I operate a cell phone with my nose? Probably not. So it's a bit different, but I understand where you're going. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
You said like a statistic earlier that kind of shocked me. You said like 15 to 20% of the population.
Yeah, the world's population.
The world's population.
Yeah.
Is there a source for that? I know statistics.
Yeah, lots of sources. Right off the top of my head, I don't have one, but if you look it up, statistics for accessibility in the world, that's kind of where I got my information from. And it was in the 15 to 20% range. I mean, a lot more so in the 65 plus demographic. It increases, but yeah, it's about 20% of the world's population. It differs between countries, obviously, and areas, but that's the pretty general stat. So you can find it online. There's lots of resources. You may get different numbers based on U.S. versus Canada, stuff like that, but it's pretty much the same. From what I could see, like that was pretty much the standard kind of number. Good question, or you want me to?
No, question. That's too
I thought you were like getting me out of here. Go ahead.
Question about, like you mentioned themes, you mentioned plugins as well. What kind of groundswell is there in the plugin community for making them accessible? Like I was building a site this week and the client wanted this plugin because it looked great, and it coughed up the only 6 red flags in the accessibility testing.
Right.
So like, you know, what's, there you go, you got remote buttons. It was just, you know, really a quandary. How do you choose out of a group that has less of a score than you would expect?
I mean, yeah, right now, like, because WordPress is only really getting into the accessibility game, it's kind of a toss-up. Even like themes, like, any developer out there, like, how many times have you bought a theme that your client said was super cool, installed it, and it was just complete crap because it was totally programmed badly and bugs and didn't work? I mean, it's kind of a toss-up, right? Until plugins are made, and that's why they had that in the Make WordPress Accessible page. They've got a list of plugins that are accessible or that do accessible things. I think the next step would be a list of plugins that aren't for accessibility but that are accessible. I think that would definitely be useful. Kind of on the lines of accessible themes. They're not themes that are specifically for accessibility, but they've been built with accessibility in mind, right? Which I think definitely, I would think that the general public, or the people that want to build accessible sites, should know what plugins they can use and not use. For the most part, you're probably going to run into a lot of problems because I don't assume a lot of plugin developers are building them accessible as of yet. But there's actually a tool called tenon.io. And it essentially is an API that does accessibility testing. There's a gentleman that created a very simple WordPress plugin that connects to this API. And the good thing with this particular plugin, the plugin's called Access Monitor. And again, it plugs into the tenon.io API. And the good thing about this particular plugin is you can actually test front-end and back-end pages. So let's say you're building a plugin. You can test how accessible it is on the front end. And you can test the accessibility of the admin pages of your plugins as well. So it's pretty robust. You can test pretty much anything and everything. So, you know, I guess the hope is that down the line, plugins and themes are being built accessible. Not that they do any accessible specific functionalities, but that they're just developed, you know, accessible overall. So there isn't any specific resource yet that will give you that information, but you know, that's something that I'm probably going to bring up to the group, to be honest, because I think that's a great idea, just in general. Like, these guys went out of their way to build plugins that are accessible. Here, use them. So,
Absolutely.
great. Any other questions?
Sort of out of time.
All right.
Go ahead.
I'm out of
If
time.
you got more questions, answer.
If you got any more questions, I'll be around. Just find me, tap me on the shoulder, tackle me. No, I'm kidding. I'm very open to talking to anyone about any specific questions. If you want to get more in depth, definitely set up a meeting or consultations. I do a lot of those.
Where are the slides?
The slides are on my website, jordanq.ca. I'll probably shoot them up on my Twitter later on. But for the most part, I publish them all on my website. And I just want to thank everyone for attending my presentation. I hope that I've given you enough information to inspire you to go home and build things more accessible. Hopefully I've given you more reasons why. Thanks, guys.